Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's patron-only video, continuing my series covering Star Trek the Animated Series. So in this video I am going to cover episodes 7 and 8 of Season 1 of Star Trek the Animated Series. So let's just jump right into it and let me get into episode 7, the Infinite Vulcan. Now it's pretty interesting because in the past couple of months, I've watched some videos on YouTube. I can't remember if I talked about this before, but a couple about the animated series. In fact, the animated series seems to be, there's more videos popping up about it recently. I recently saw a video from Steve Shives that said that he really liked the animated series and that it's very underrated and most people complain about the animation, which you can kind of see, but he thinks that it's a really great show and underrated. And then I watched a YouTube video from, I can't remember the channel, but this channel just doesn't cover Star Trek regularly, but she covered like the really crap episodes and made fun of them. She covered Sub Rosa, she covered Prophet and Lace, A Night in Sick Bay, and Spock's Brain. And so really and Threshold, had to get Threshold in there. So basically they're really shit episodes. And so it's funny, for the animated series she covered this episode, the Infinite Vulcan, but she stated at the start that unlike the other series like Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, Voyager, the original series, where she picked out the worst episode and for the most part the series is great, she said that the animated series was all shit. And basically she picked out, the episode she picked out was like, she thought was her personal worst, but the rest of the series was not much better. So she was way more down on it than I am. So I'm kind of in between these two viewpoints. I think Steve Shives is being way too positive on the animated series. I think there's a lot wrong with it just beyond the animation. But this other YouTuber, she was much harder on it than I would be. And this episode in particular, I didn't like it. I will agree it is a bad episode, but I don't think it's the worst thing ever. I don't think it's up there with, say, A Prophet and Lace or Threshold or Night in Sick Bay or Sub Rosa. Definitely not as bad as those, in my opinion. But this episode, it reminds me a lot of Spock's Brain. So I can kind of understand why this would be singled out. And in fact, it kind of feels like the writers of this episode are like, hey, let's just do another episode that's just like Spock's Brain. Now, I think it is better than Spock's Brain, just to clarify, but it has the same basic premise where it's almost like they stole Spock's intelligence, his mind. So instead of his brain, this time it was his mind. So it was almost just as bad. So these aliens, this giant alien who's like a clone, wanted to make a giant clone of Spock. So you wanted to steal Spock's mind and put it into the mind of this giant clone. And of course, the real Spock would die, and Kirk's not happy with that and tried to fight against it. But then the giant Spock, once he came to, he's Spock, so he helped out. And he mind melded with little Spock, or the real Spock. And that's what saved him, because he mind melded and transferred his consciousness. So they both were Spock, and so now there's two Spocks that exist. That's really dumb. I'm not gonna beat around the bush. That's pretty dumb. And the whole thing with this main alien he wants to create a race of guardians and sentries that will bring peace to the galaxy, and it does sound like the way he says it is very forceful, bringing peace. And Spock is like, no, of course I'm not going to do that, because they're basically talking about being an authoritarian regime that polices the entire galaxy and forces peace upon them. And Spock's like, yeah, let's not do that. Instead, let's just hang out on this planet. Let's help these planet aliens revive their society. And the other giant guy was just like, oh, okay, sure. What? He went through all this trouble that he was trying to fight Kirk and all these things, and he got the aliens who they were attacking them the whole entire time, and he's been this like tyrant for centuries and centuries. But all this Spock has to say is, "Now let's not do that." And he's like, "Oh yeah, you're right. Let's not go there after all. 'Tis a silly place." It's like, what? What the hell is going on? And then they had these like pterodactyl things that had the cheesiest sound effects. It was just these bird sound effects going, and they were like attacking Kirk and everyone. I'm like, oh my god. But I don't think this is the worst episode ever, because I did think the plant life was kind of interesting. It was interesting that there's sentient plants and that the whole society was based off that, and the relationship they had with humans, and how they had built ships to go on a mass like sort of exodus, and but their society was ravaged by a plague, because it talked about how when the humanoid came to visit, he has incompatible, so he brought plagues that were harmless to him but harmed the plants. And that's really interesting. I think that was an interesting backstory with the society. And also, I like how they focus more. This is the one thing I will say I really like about the animated series overall, is I like how they focus more on the minor characters, much more than the original series ever did. Because in this episode in particular, it ends with, like, you know how almost all the episodes of the original series end with this stupid quirky jokes between Kirk, Spock, and McCoy, and they're like, ha 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 ha. They did that, but it was with Kirk and Sulu. And I think this is the first time ever, even for the animated series, where it wasn't Kirk, Spock, and McCoy. I mean, sometimes, I think there was a couple times in the original series, Scotty was involved, but he was never the main. He was always just there to laugh with McCoy at Spock. Ha ha ha, he's got pointy ears, ha ha ha. He doesn't feel emotions, ha ha ha. But here, like, Sulu was the butt of the joke. Like, he was the focus. He was like, I thought the joke was really dumb, because all these jokes are dumb. But he's like, oh, Kirk says something like, "Oh, you are incorrigible, Sulu." Blech. This is 60s and 70s humor. There's no getting around it. I think it's so cheesy. Of course, it's over like 50, 40 years old at this stage, so it's really outdated. But I like the fact that they focus on Sulu. And in fact, Uhura, like, had a couple lines in dialogue where she was telling Scotty, I think it was Scotty, it was someone on the Enterprise, maybe it was Spock, being like, no, Spock's the one who's dying. I don't know, it was Scotty. She's like, actually, we could need to do this, blah, 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 and telling him, like, what to do instead of just sitting there and pushing buttons. So they have all the minor characters do more, which I really like. So I don't think this episode is a complete failure, but even for a cartoon. Now, I say it's really Spock's brain-like, but Spock's brain, as I talked about in that review, I think is actually an okay episode, because if you look at it from the perspective that is aimed towards children, that the target audience is children. To be fair, a lot of kids did see this. I like this. I like that episode as I was a kid. And I think it actually works a bit if you look at it from that perspective, which is why I don't think it's one of the worst episodes of the original series, because I think there's other episodes, because its main crime is being ridiculous and silly, but there's other episodes where the plot falls apart, the characters make no sense, it was poorly written, and I don't really see that as the case of either of these two episodes. In this episode, I can give even more leeway to, because it is specifically aimed at children. This is a cartoon show, a kid's cartoon that aired on Saturday mornings. So I can give it some leeway for being utterly ridiculous, but not much. So anyway, my rating for the Infinite Vulcan out of 10 is a 3. Very poor. Yeah, I'll give it a 3. As I said, I like the character interactions. I like how they focus on the minor characters. The plant life things were really interesting. But there's another thing where Sulu, like, he's on an alien planet and he sees this walking plant and he's like, oh, let's just pick it up and touch it. morons! Come on, you're in a totally alien plane. You're just gonna pick it up and whatever. Well, that usually like Starfleet would investigate, like, and they would scan and it wouldn't just whatever. Anyway, it reminds me of that thing from Galaxy Quest when they go to Alien Planet and Sam Rockwell's like, "Is there air? You don't know." Like, I don't know. Anyway. Let me move on to the next episode, episode 8, which is the Magiks of Megas-Tu. And this episode, I actually would say is worse than the previous episode. I would say so far this is, I'm only 8 episodes in, but so far I would say this is the worst episode of the animated series. This episode was horrible. It was not only was it was just utterly ridiculous. And even if I put that filter that was aimed towards children, it is still stupid. It makes no sense. So, and it's weird because this is canon. That's probably one of the reasons why animated series wasn't considered canon for decades, because it contradicts Star Trek V, another masterpiece, because they're going towards the center of the galaxy. Of course, in Star Trek V, it was that God guy who was like, "What does God need with Starship?" But here, it's magic. It's Satan, or not Satan, Lucifer, sorry. Lucifer lives there, and a bunch of magic, like witches, real life witches. And let me just say, now, I do have to, I am harder on this episode because I'm watching it now, in 2019 in retrospect. And back in the 70s, like, a lot of this wasn't as damn cliched and overused as it is now, to be fair. But even at the time it came out, the original series had done this particular storyline to death, where there was some aliens that came to Earth, and that explains some part of the of Earth's mythology. It's the whole Stargate thing too. So it's. But, as I said, even in the original series, even before this episode was aired, it was done to death. It's especially done to death now, like throughout the 30 years of like Stargate and Next Generation would do, and Voyager did a couple episodes like this. They did the one with the... So in this case, it's trying to say that all the wizards... I actually thought they were going to mention Merlin, but they didn't do that. But they focused more on Salem and saying that the witches they burned were actual, like, aliens with magical powers. And the fact that they go around calling it magic is like, oh, you can do magic too. But what really, like, made me totally just think this episode was complete garbage was when they're in the magical realm and Spock's like, hey, you can do magic too. It's only logical because we're in a magical realm. That means anyone can do logic. So he draws the fucking satanic symbol, whatever, and he stands on it. And he starts, and he starts glowing, woo, and he moves things with his mind. And he's like, oh, it's only logical. I don't even know what to say about that. It's logical that since they're in a magical realm that they can use magic, but they're not. God damn it! And then once they're on the planet, they're like, they turn it into a trial, a literal witch trial at Salem. They recreate Salem, and they want to kill Kirk and his crew because of what the humans did to them back in Salem. So they recreate it to sort of mirror it and try to. It's weird because you can look at it as like a prototype for kind of a far point about these powerful beings putting humanity on trial. And maybe that is actually partly what inspired kind of the far point. But this is way more cheesy. This is ridiculous. And then the big reveal that the Lucian, who is like the humans, oh, he's actually Lucifer. I was just like, ugh. It's just like the whole like Jack the Ripper thing, and let's say that the things in our history were actually aliens with powers, and they would think that. But they kept calling it magic, and then they had this fight where Kirk fought the judge, and he's like, I can do magic too, and they go to all these realms and go woo doo 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 doo. It's one of the cheesiest things I've ever seen. It was horrible. Horrible. Absolutely horrendous. So my rating for the Magiks of Megas-Tu is a 2. Extremely poor. And now, I was very close to giving this a 1, but there were some aspects of this episode I thought were passable, like were somewhat interesting. But for the most part, I just could not stand it. Anyway, that is it for my coverage of episodes 7 and 8 of Season 1 of Star Trek The Animated Series. Thank you so much for watching this. And of course, thank you so much for supporting my channel. Very much appreciated, very much needed. If you have any more suggestions on any other perks for Patreon or anything else that you would like me to do, I'm very open to hearing because I am so appreciated. And I hope you guys are appreciating this coverage of the animated series. Anyway, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.